we are back with part 9 of this week's reading from the Messianic Jewish Family Bible, Tree of Life version. And we are covering quite a vast territory because we did the introduction to Leviticus, and we are going through chapters 1 through 15 this week, which is a lot of territory to cover. So we are already now at chapter 14, probably close to about halfway done with chapter 14. And we're going to continue on to the end here on this part. The Kohen should offer the sin offering and make atonement for the one being cleansed because of his uncleanness. Afterward, he is to slaughter the burnt offering. Then the Kohen is to present the burnt offering along with the grain offering on the altar. So the Kohen should make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If he is poor and cannot afford so much, then he should take one male lamb for a trespass offering to be waived, to make atonement for him, plus one tenth of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil for a grain offering, a pint of oil, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. The one should be a sin offering and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day he is to bring them to the Kohen for his cleansing at the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai. The Kohen is to take the lamb of the trespass offering and the pint of oil and wave them for a wave offering before Adonai. He is to slaughter the lamb of the trespass offering. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the trespass offering and dab it on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The Kohen should then pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand. He is to sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil that is in his left hand 7 times before Adonai. Then the Kohen is to dab some of the oil that is in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, also on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the place of the blood of the trespass offering. The rest of the oil that is in his hand, the Kohen is to dab on the head of the one being cleansed, to make atonement for him before Adonai. He is to offer one of the turtle doves or the young pigeons from what his hand can afford. The one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering with the grain offering. The Kohen should make atonement for him, being cleansed before Adonai. This is the Torah for one on who is the mark of Ze'erot, and that is leprosy, who is not able to afford the sacrifice for his cleansing. The next section deals with the purification of a house. Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Suppose you have come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for a possession, and I put a mark of Ze'erot in a house, in the land you possess. Then the one who owns the house should come and tell the Kohen, saying, Something like a mark has appeared in my house. The Kohen is to order the house emptied before he goes in to examine the mark, so that nothing in the house might be made unclean. Then afterward the Kohen is to enter to inspect the house. He is to examine the mark, and behold, if the mark is in the walls or the house with hollow streaks, greenish or reddish, and appears deeper than the wall, then the Kohen is to go out of the house to the door and close up the house for 7 days. Then the Kohen is to come again on the 7th day, and behold, if the mark has spread in the walls of the house, then the Kohen is to command that they take out the stones which are marked and throw them into an unclean place outside of the city. He should also have the inside of the house scraped all throughout, and they are to dump the mortar that they scraped off outside of the city into an unclean place. They may then take other stones and put them in the place of those stones. Likewise, he can take other mortar and plaster the house. But suppose the contamination returns, breaking out in the house after he has pulled out the stones and after he has scraped the house, and it has been replastered. Then the Kohen is to go examine, and behold, if the plague has spread within the house, it is a destructive mildew inside, it is unclean. He is to break down the house, its stones, its timber, along with all the house's mortar, and carry them out of the city into an unclean place. Moreover, whoever goes into the house while it is shut up will be unclean until the evening. The one who lies down in the house must wash his clothes, and he who eats in the house must wash his clothes too. But if the Kohen comes in, inspects it, and behold, the plague has not spread within the house after it has been replastered, then he should pronounce the house clean, because the contamination is healed. In order to cleanse the house, he is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. He is to kill one of the birds in a clay pot over living water. Then he is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet, and the living bird, and dip them into the blood, or the slain bird, as well as the living water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He should cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, with the living water, with the living bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet. But he is to let the living bird go out of the city into the open field. So he is to make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the Torah for any mark of za'arot, even for a scab, or the za'arot in a garment, or for a house, or for a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the Torah of za'arot, of leprosy. So that is the end of chapter 14, and that is, addressing the cleansing of the lepers and the offerings that are to be made, and the anointing oil is done prior to being pronounced clean, the ability to come back into the camp, and then addressing the handling of leprosy in the house. Also sounded like dealing with mold and mildew in a house too. If the plague of leprosy is also in the house, it's declared unclean by the priest, and is detailed what the priest must look for in the walls and how to cleanse the house. The priest will declare the house clean when it is clean, and no trace of the plague returns. And offerings were also made. So we're going to continue on also then with chapter 15. Prior to that, right before we do that, I want to just recap where we have actually been. So the earlier part of Leviticus, we were dealing with all the offerings, the burnt offerings, the meal offerings, well, the matzah flour offerings, the shalom offerings, the sin offerings, the trespass offerings. So there's 5 different offerings that were discussed. Also the laws and the offerings for the priest, the sanctification of the priests, and addressing how they needed to also give their offerings and offer their sin offerings as well. So we dealt with all of that, and then we also dealt with like I said, the anointing of the priests and getting them ready for ministry, and they were taught and instructed on exactly how they needed to minister, how they needed to take care of the inner sanctuary, and take care of the people as well, and actually all of the sacrifices that were made and how to do each and every one of them. Then we we learned about what strange fire it was, because Aaron's 2 sons did not listen to the instructions, and they offered strange fire before the Lord, and he didn't command them to do that. So they ended up being consumed, and they died before the Lord. And that was Nadab and Abihu. So then the sons of Uzziel had to carry them out of the camp. That was Mishael and Elzaphan. And then the last 2 sons of Aaron were brought forward, and that is Eleazar and Ithamar. And so Eleazar becomes very key um, as we move forward, and that's a spoiler alert too. You're going to hear more about Eleazar. and his son. So then we move on to chapter 11, and we were dealing with clean and unclean animals and what was permitted to be eaten and what was not permitted to be eaten. And then the purification in chapter 12 after childbirth, which was very important. And then, of course, we've moved into skin plagues and leprosy in chapters 13 and 14. And now we are going to complete this with purification from discharges in chapter 15. And that will be ending our reading for this week. So, chapter 15, purification from discharges. Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak to Benaiah Israel, and tell them, when any man has a fluid discharge from his body because of his discharge, he is unclean. This is to be his uncleanness in his discharge, whether his body flows with his discharge or his body obstructs his discharge, it is his uncleanness. Every bed on which he who has the discharge lies will become unclean, and everything he sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whoever sits on anything on which the man who has the discharge, that is, to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whoever touches the body of the one who has the discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Or if the one who has the discharge spits on someone who is clean, then he is also to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Any saddle the one who has the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries them is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Also, the person with the discharge touches without rinsing his hands in water should wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. A clay pot that one with a discharge touches should be broken, and every wooden vessel should be rinsed in water. When the one who has a fluid discharge is cleansed of his issue, then he is to count for himself 7 days for his purification and wash his clothes. Then he is to bathe his body in running water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and come before Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the Kohen. The Kohen is to offer them, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the Kohen should make atonement for him before Adonai for his fluid discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, then he is to bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. Every garment and all leather with semen on it are to be washed with water, and will be unclean until the evening. If a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, they should both bathe themselves in water and be unclean until the evening. If a woman has a discharge and her discharge from her body is blood, she should be in her nida, NIDDAH, 7 days. And whoever touches her will be unclean until the evening. Everything that she lies on in her nida will become unclean. Also, everything that she sits on will become unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whoever touches anything that she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. If it is on the bed or anything where she sits, where he touches it, he will be unclean until the evening. If any man lies with her so that her nida gets on him, he will be unclean for 7 days, and every bed where he lies will be unclean. Now, if a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days, not during her nida, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her nida, all the days of the discharge of her uncleanness should be as in the days of her nida. She is unclean. Okay, so this is like the woman with the issue of blood. This is beyond that period, that 7 days. So she wasn't supposed to be out there in public, as I mentioned earlier. Every bed where she lies all the days of her discharge will be like her bed during her nida, Everything she sits on will become unclean, like the uncleanness of her nida. Whoever touches these things will become unclean, and is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she is to count off 7 days for herself, and after that she will be clean. On the 8th day she is to take 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to offer the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the Kohen will make atonement for her before Adonai for the uncleanness of her discharge. So you are to keep Bnei Israel separate from their uncleanness, so they will not die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. This is the Torah for one who has a discharge, or for one who has an emission of semen, which causes him to become unclean, as well as for her who has her period of nida, and for the man or woman who has a discharge, or the one who lies with her who is unclean. So to recap that, chapter 15 talks about the laws of uncleanness. These are addressed: bodily, clothing, furniture, anything touched by uncleanness rather, and offerings to be made. Issues of blood with women are unclean. Time that women is considered unclean, and with men as well. The times when a couple are considered to be unclean is also addressed. And just a little extra nugget: nida, Niddah, just means unclean. Okay, well, that's the end of our reading for this week. We're going to come back actually with a closing prayer and the altar call, and then the Aaronic blessing, and close out the teaching for this week.